Well, hello there. I'm Christopher Cohen, and this is Wolfed, the podcast that jams out with engineering leaders to hear which qualities and learnings have led them to success. On today's episode, I have the wit and the wisdom of Javier López. That's the Vice President of Engineering at Carta. Among other topics, we hit on the importance of transparency in leadership and decision making, fostering problem solving skills within engineering teams, and scaling management practices as teams grow in size. Thank you so much for making the time for us today, Javier.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Oh, absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you. And I want to start the way that I generally start with everybody, which is just that I'm always very curious about what your first exposure to software engineering was.
So that's a very interesting story. Quickly, like every other, most of engineering kids, I was very curious when I was a kid, and I was always trying to reach a computer. I'm not going to reveal my age by telling you like the type of computer that I was interested into when I was a kid, but I think it was very early, opening the VCR of the family, opening the radio that we used to have, and then trying to put everything together, and interesting mainly on the hardware at the beginning. But everything has to do with computers. I was fascinated by it, and that's how I think as early as my motivation started. Yeah.
That's so interesting because, from hardware to software, what did that look like? Kind of maybe shifting gears a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I was growing up back in Mexico City, in a city called Orizaba in Veracruz, middle of the mountains. We didn't have access to a lot of different electronics. So I was like, everything that I have access, I want to disarm it and see how it works in the internals and then try to put it together. Growing up with that fascination, obviously you get to a point that you go to school and then you get access to computers, and then you learn that not everything needs to be put it apart because you don't know how to put it back, basically. And they start going from there. Attraction to everything, every new electronic that cross in front of me, that I have the opportunity to snatch my fingers on it, I will be fascinated by it. That's how I grew up, going to other friends and houses and checking their computers, interest for the hardware. How do I build a computer for the first time? I build it from other people first and then create mine. And when I was my teenagers years, I actually worked building computers. So that was the hardware part, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you satisfy your interest about how things work in the interior, then you start asking like how the software works. And I think that was the natural progression for me.
Gotcha. And so, I mean, it sounds like from a very young age, you sort of had this in your sights. I mean, was there ever a time that you considered doing anything else with your career, or did you always know you were headed for tech?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I never. It was never my intention to be in computer systems at all. Right. Back in the day when I was a teenager, I always wanted to be a photographer, a professional photographer. I also crossed to my mind actually be a lawyer. Depending on circumstances when you grow up, then you have different answers. Like every time that I mention my parents that I want to be a photographer, they say it's like, well, let me tell you, that's not going to be a very successful career for you, right? You're always going to end up taking pictures at weddings and events, and that's your future. So not a lot of support and motivation back in those days, right? So thinking always about what is the best that you can get out of your career and what are the best options that you have. So it was natural for me to work with computers, and then people around you start suggesting if that's what you are good at it, just dedicate to your career to it, right? So a little bit forced, I'm not going to lie, right? I want to be a photographer, but if one thing that I learned is like cameras are more expensive than computers at some point. So yeah, I think it was a little bit forced by the idea like you will get out of more out of your career as a software engineer or as a computer system back in the day than a photographer, and you will need to learn and memorize less data than if you became a lawyer as well. So those things combined, a little bit of the attraction, a little bit of the social pressure, and then decide to move into computer systems. Yeah.
And did that end up being true for you? I mean, have you ever looked back and thought, I should have been a photographer after all?
I mean, there is always going back, right? Like when you start working and you start having hobbies, and then you have access to things that you didn't have access before. It's like, hey, I'm not bad at this. I should keep doing this, right? But then you go with reading what you're already doing, and then you say, well, I can do this as a hobby. Don't necessarily need to go back and rethink everything. So that was more my case. Like, just continue what you are doing, and then take the secondary space that you have and take hobbies and do the things that you like it since the beginning. Yeah.
What did that look like, kind of getting into the field as a software developer and working at startups early on? How did that influence your career?
Yeah. What I was saying is, like, it has a high level of influence, right? I was building hardware, and the interest that I was having is like, I'm building this for people who are doing things with these equipments. What are the things that they are doing, right? That combined with the natural instinct of me, like going to the web and then researching more about the parts that I was collecting, I started getting into communities. And getting into communities, I started creating my own pages, start creating my own blogs. And this is early 2000s, when the concept was not very popular even for blogs, right? So how do I create my website? How do I modify my website? How do I start doing this? So the natural progression of interesting on early web, and then coding and HTML and JavaScript, and then the different, like, how now I know how to build a site, right? How do I make it more dynamic, right? And then you start involving into programming languages in order to build sites. I never went into software engineering about building software for a particular platform or operating systems. My full interest was web pages and web systems, right? That was my main thing, because that was what I was living on a daily basis, right? So along with my daily work of working on building computers and my career, the software engineering, I started specializing in, like, I want to do web applications. I want to build websites. That's what I want to do, right? So it was a natural progression. Self-learning how to build websites, and then combining that with my software engineering studies, and then putting them together. I had very early opportunity. I was 18 years old at the time when somebody came to me. It's like, hey, I hear that you like to build some websites. Yeah. So I have a particular company, and it's a Saturday. We need to deliver a website on Monday, and the two engineers that I have are sick. Do you want to help me? So I went with that person, I helped them, and then we finished the site. And by Monday, it's like, would you like to actually work with me? Right.
Amazing.
Which originally I say no. I was like, honestly, like the money that you're offering me is like, I make more building computers and reselling computers that building websites. But you are using an early version of GSP and Java, and I'm interested, but and I know that that's the progression of my career. So even if I really love building computers, I'd rather go and start working with you. And that was my first professional job as a software engineer, right? Learning on the fly to build sites with GSP and HTML, and then a little bit of backend on Java. Very early days of those technologies. So most people probably don't even remember that, but that was the early beginnings, right? A consultancy company that worked with different customers. And then while I was already, like, my first year of my career, I was already building sites, right? So
Wow.
that was the early approach. Yeah.
So what did this look like then, going from, as early as this first role, being an individual contributor, to actually starting to build out teams and having engineers working underneath you?
Yeah, and this is very interesting, because this whole context I'm talking about is back in Mexico City, right? This
Right.
is not the common U.S. Startup path that most people here in the U.S. have. Like, I'm talking about back in Mexico, where when you are the software engineer world doesn't exist, right? You are a programmer at best, right? And as a programmer, you do basically everything. You do the coding, you do the product management, you fix the printer, right? You fix the internet when you come to the office because the internet doesn't work. So you are the programmer, so you need to fix that, right?
Gotcha.
So that's the context of software engineering. At least it was back in the day, like 20 years ago in Mexico City, right? You do everything. You are the person who are in front of the computer, and you need to do everything that is around the computer, right? So with that in mind and with that context, your responsibilities start to grow, right? You're not only building websites or only building web applications. You start having all these responsibilities. So the natural progression is like, I need more people to help me out with this, right? So the first company that I worked was a consultancy. We have these constant rotations, new engineers coming out of new graduates, right? And that was my job, basically. Is like everything that you are doing now, delegate it to somebody new, right? Teach somebody new and then delegate how to do. We acquire a new customer, you do the same with the new customer, and then you teach a new generation, and then you do it. So that was a natural progression. Now it's easy to exemplify that it was part of my growth of knowing how to delegate and how to manage. I didn't know at that point, right? At that point, like, oh yeah, I'm a programmer, and this is part of the normal functions of a programmer, right? So, but I didn't know at that time what I was, all the value that I was getting with that experience. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wonder, when it comes to navigating those specific challenges and culture that is, surrounding startups, and especially startups that can often be experiencing difficulties, like how does that influence your approach to building engineering teams?
Yeah, and I'm going to skip forward, right? So now
Sure.
this is 15 years of working on these models, obviously with some level of progression, working on different environments, different type of companies back in Mexico City. We're talking of more than 10 years working as a programmer, and in the middle having multiple roles as a manager, right?
Hmm.
I got a point like I met with a few friends and like we have an agency, we want you to come here and then help us build some apps. Yeah, perfect. But you are a manager, right? But you basically do everything. You're still
Sure.
Harkonnen, right? So that's my first exposure to having some more complex problems, right?
Hmm.
Back in the day, the biggest company I was working there, we are an agency, and one of our customers is a major airline in Mexico, right? And as an agency, you cut corners all the places, right? You hire like very junior people, and then you sell resources to bigger enterprise companies, very senior people, right? And then you start hitting quickly the ceiling of skills and expertise of your team, and
Hmm.
then you actually do hands-on and solve those problems for them, teach them on the fly how to solve those problems, and then move on because you have three more other customers, right? So that was very early, like back in Mexico, my exposure to these complex problems of a certain type of startups that at that point was a digital agency.
Mm.
Translating that like to 11 years ago when I came to the US and then actually worked in the first startup here in the US, right? I came from that environment. Like we basically have fires every single day because we have set of different customers. To a startup that everything is a little more in control, right? Um, and the problems um, are not as frequent as other regions, right? Like back in Mexico. But you have them, right? So you start
Hmm.
facing all these different difficulties in new startups. So for me, now I can say it a little more comfortable, but it was very easy, right? Like the first startup here in Silicon Valley, Guys Park, amazing company, were doing some software for human resources systems. Like we have escalations on a weekly basis, right? We have high stakes customers, and for me, it was natural to handle those many of those because I was doing that on a daily basis, right? later I learned like that's not a common case, right?
Right.
That in the natural startup system, regularly software engineers don't get involved with customer support, right? I didn't have those barriers. I didn't have those limitations. It was very easy for me. Customers reporting an issue, pick up the phone, call the customer, figure it out what is happening, solve the problem, give them an answer, right? And that's one of some of the things that helped me early in my career here in the US. Um, to make a success path on management, because people were appreciating that. It's like you don't have barriers, you go directly to the problem, solve the problem, bring it to the team, solve it, and communicate back to the customer. um, so I acknowledge that was part of the success early here in the startups in the US, but for me it was absolutely normal, right? It was just
Right.
another day.
You were forged in the fires. So
Yeah.
yeah, this was yeah, exactly. Well, so I wonder, I mean, that has to have had a pretty big impact on how you manage your own teams, maybe how you train your own engineers to kind of handle that sort of stuff or be ready to handle that sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely, because I think on my naive vision, every engineer should have a very high level product mentality and high level customer success mentality, right? That's how I learned how to do engineering back in the day, right?
Hmm.
So for me, it was very natural that when I was mentoring and coaching new group of engineers in this new startup, my expectation was very high, right? Every engineer needs to involve not only on the set of requirements for the product, or verify the quality and do QA for work, but also be closer to the customer experience, and then be closer with the customer success experience. Like, all of that was part of my expectations, right? Now I learned that in at least on US startups, that's not uncommon now, but it was never it's a desirable state, right?
Mm,
That's not the initial state.
yeah.
And for me was that's the minimum bar. Right?
Gotcha.
So I think that definitely helped me to put me apart. Like I was being noticed about it, right? And my teams were noticed about it, right? Um, if I can go back and change something, I probably don't change much, but I will be more conscious about it. That these are not general expectations for every level of engineering in every startup. Yeah.
Well, but it sounds like it was, like you said, it's something that distinguished you. So ultimately a great thing. And I guess, I mean, maybe the flip side of this would be interesting, because it sounds like this is something that gave you an advantage as you kind of moved from Mexico City to the US. Did you find, like, what were the obstacles that surrounded, that immigration movement? And as you kind of tried to pursue a successful career in engineering leadership here, were there difficulties, that came along with that as you immigrated?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the major one and the most common ones, without trying to generalize, but one of the common ones of immigration, the major challenge is the imposter syndrome, right? So one of the mentalities that in my particular case I have when I came to the US is like, everything is going to be different. The levels of quality, the levels of strategy, the levels of coordination for companies in the US is going to be miles ahead of everything that I have experienced after 12 years back in Mexico City. It's going to be extremely different, right? The surprise that you have at the beginning is like, it's not really that different. The problems are exactly the same. And actually, you have way more support in order to solve those problems. But because at the beginning, I didn't realize that immediately, right? I was always feeling like I don't feel like I'm working as hard as I
Mm,
used to work back in Mexico, right? I don't feel like I'm putting enough effort like I used to do. So maybe I'm doing something really wrong, right?
mm,
So that constant feeling of there is something that I'm not doing right, right? There is something that I'm missing. uh, I don't know how I'm being valued and judged, uh, but I don't feel like I'm doing enough. So probably I don't have enough workload because they don't trust me. Maybe I don't have enough workload because I don't have the right skills to do them, right? So those are strong challenges. It may sound a little bit naive or not serious, but it will lead you to full like blocks, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't know if this is the right thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that was one of the major challenges. All that imposter syndrome, like I am doing the right thing, am I the right person to do this job? The second challenge was how do I gain trust, right? One of the major issues that you face when you're coming from a different country, it doesn't matter if you have 10, 20 years back of experience, right? Your experience in a new system most of the time is going to be counted as zero, right? Silicon Valley is the best example about it. Any conversation you have, people will ask you, "Oh, how many startups have you worked?" Right? Well, I work for a bank. I work for an institution like federal institution. I work for different consultancies. I work for an airline, right? But it doesn't count because it's not a Silicon Valley startup, right? So in the eyes of the community local, it's like, oh, you don't have experience yet, right? Um, which, if you put it together with the um, with imposter syndrome, you actually believe that story. My experience, my 12 years of experience doesn't count. Right? And I think that was the second challenge, right? Those conversations are difficult when you start realizing you change your tones, like, oh, I do have experience, right? You mention your experience in the terms like somebody will understand that you have in the previous startup back in San Jose or Santa Clara, but no, it's really something that happened 10 years ago in Mexico. But you don't say that, right? You learn how to manipulate the data so people don't um, see it from a different perspective. That's definitely another challenge. Um, I would like to say that it's not present anymore, but it's still there. It's still there. Very often you see people coming into startups and then you see your peers just saying like, oh, they don't have experience, right? What are you talking about? The CV, they've been doing this for 20 years, right? So, yeah, those were, in my particular case, two of the major challenges that I have doing that transition.
Yeah, so I have to imagine that given that experience, when it comes to mentoring engineers under you, especially those who have kind of been on the same path you have, maybe they are immigrating to the U.S. or maybe you are working with them offshore. That's got to be a big part of how you interact with them, how you kind of pass on your learnings. Is that the case, and what does that
It
look
is the
like for you?
case. It's still the case. I have the fortune to work with different teams in different locations. Still working with some in Latin America, working with some in Brazil, and one of the things that I try to do differently that most of the managers here in the US don't do, I spend some times with them calibrating about the different expectations of each countries, right? I'm going to use one particular example. A year ago, I went and talked with my engineering team in Rio, and I asked them one particular question. How long do you spend? How long do you are thinking about spending total time in this company? How long do you think you are going to be in this company, right? And the lower number was 6 years, but the average was 10 years, right? That was the only question. And when you interview 25 engineers and everybody, the least amount is 6 years, and everybody say, I expect to be in this company for 10 years. And then you tell them, well, I actually asked exactly the same question to 20 engineers in San Francisco, and the higher I can go is 4, right? so I use that example as a method of calibration, right? I
Hmm.
try to lean on the experiences that I have and the misalignments that I discovered in my career, how it works in my country versus how it works for American startups, and then be very candid and transparent with my engineers and say, these are the different expectations you have, right? Um, this is what an engineer is expecting in the US versus what you are expecting. This is where the experiences actually differ, right? And try to use that and utilize that to align with the grow desires of each individuals, right? Um, it's not the same when you are expecting to be in a company for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't push back, for example, if you don't push for your next promotion, it's going to
Right.
be very different for somebody who expects to be in the company for years than somebody that's going to be expecting to be 10 years,
Yeah.
right? The way that you negotiate compensation, the way that you schedule even like time off, all of those perspectives change it. Just one die simple question, right? One simple question. So I do use every opportunity that I can to all those things that I realize after 11 years being in the US that I are different, not only culturally but also by expectations, and then show to my teams earlier, right? So they are aware of those and we can manage those as the team keeps growing.
I wondered, do you end up recommending that they, because there is this culture of like, okay, I'm going to work somewhere for 2, 3, 4 years, and then I'm going to move on. When you see someone who says to you, "Yeah, I plan on working here 6, 8, 10 years," do you say, "Great, we value that loyalty," or do we say, "Honestly, that's not best for your career in the States," or how do you advise them?
I don't give a general advice. I don't tell them what to do. I just want them to be very conscious about what are the difference and the expectations.
Hmm.
It's in each individual to use that information and then attach them to their growth plan, right? And then use that information as they consider best for their interest, right? We have engineers that have been at the company for 6 and 7 years, and they continue to be as efficient as contributing as much as they can on a daily basis. As a company, do we want to get rid of institutional knowledge that expands 7 years of very efficient engineer? I don't think we want to do that, right? Um, but also, there are some cases of engineers like I want to go beyond that. What is for me beyond that, right? And I
Hmm.
think that's a very valid question, right? There are people who are okay with a constant growth, and there are people who are better with an accelerated growth, right? Now it's on them to take all the different variables, the expectations from the company, the expectation from their peers, their expectation from the industry. Take all of them, put it in their own career plan, and say, "This is what I'm comfortable with, and this is what I want to do." Right. I think what it helps me the most sharing this information with other engineers and with managers is to open up a conversation that is more centered on realistic plans, rather than plans that are not as realistic because they don't understand all the variables, right?
Yeah.
I don't give a particular recommendation. I just tell them to use the information and to inject that into their own career plans.
So it's more important to you that you equip them with all the necessary knowledge, but still let them carve
Yeah,
their own path. Gotcha. I love that. I think that's definitely the right choice because it is an individual's choice, and I think there are pros and cons to the different approaches, right?
yeah, that is correct.
So I guess to take a little bit of a step back, I'm curious for you, with the experience you've gathered and with, maybe even back to your days as an individual contributor when you had your own managers above you, what are the most important qualities that you think are essential to be an effective leader in the field of engineering?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I'm going to change it a little bit my answer based
Please.
on what made me actually became a manager, and then go back and forth into that decision a few times, right?
Sure.
The funny story is like I always tell the story to my engineers that came to me and say that they want to be a manager. Like, why do we want to be a manager? And tell them the first time that I wanted to be a manager is because I have a manager that was so bad that I told myself, I'm pretty sure I can do his job better, right? And I challenge myself, and then I talk with escalate level and say, hey, I can do his job better, right? And I can prove to you that I can do his job better. It was a very infantile and not very mature reaction, right? and at that point, somebody, the owner of the company, told me, "Yeah, go ahead, be a manager. You think you can do the job better? Do it. I'll give you the role, right?" And then you're in that particular occasion, I was fully driven by pride more than anything else, right? And prove that I can do it better, and then realize how difficult everything, that the choices they were making were, and all the things that I didn't see, and all the things that I never considered, right? um, so I'm not going to say that I regret that decision, but I think it was a very immature, and that's regularly something that I see, that I still see. Immature reactions force you to ask for something else, right? To take a different path. That was my first case. I realized that obviously there were a lot of things that I didn't consider. And what I took from that occasion is like, yeah, I think there are a lot of things that I didn't know why were so difficult, and why they were doing this in this way. I still wish they were a little more transparent about sharing with us what they were doing, right? I would probably understood them better if they shared with me everything they were doing and all the challenges they were having. So I still think I'm right, right? uh, but after that, it's like, thank you for the opportunity. It was great. I just want to go back and code. So I want to go back to IC. And
Gotcha.
it happened a couple of times, back and forth, went into IC back, and then went into manager back. It happened the final time here in the US. It's like, oh, I want to go to a startup. I want to learn how real engineering is done. Right. That was my thinking. Right. I want to learn how real engineering is done. I want to code with the best people in the world. Came to the US 2 weeks into the job. It's like, hey, we really like you. And then you have a lot of qualities to be a manager. We need a manager. Starting tomorrow, you're a manager. So no options there.
Yeah, just thrust upon you.
Yeah. So that's a little bit of story about how it came to be.
So I wonder then, I mean, has that been an important part of, as a manager, have you tried to incorporate that level of transparency so that your direct reports aren't frustrated the way that you were?
Absolutely. That's fundamentally shaped the way of my manager philosophy today, right? From early stage, like low level manager, team of 4 or 5, to now having a team of 75 people, right? My core believing is that the more transparent you are, the more you state the different challenges that you have and how you solve it, and show everybody how it's done, the more people understand what are you doing, why you are making those decisions, right? And I keep constantly think about it. If I will be in the other side, if I will be the IC, what I would like to hear, right? So I don't do it as often as an exercise of it's always on my mind, but it has shaped my philosophy through the years.
That's lovely, and I laugh because this is something I've heard a lot on this podcast from folks who eventually ended up in a manager's position, which was they saw their manager doing who knows what from their perspective. They thought, chicken shit, basically. And they said, I can do that better. And everyone seems to share that same realization at some point, that it's like, okay, maybe that was a little prideful. Now that I'm in the role, there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than I thought. But it's interesting because I think it is a certain type of individual who gets the chance to kind of make that observation, put themselves in that position. Maybe you feel a little overwhelmed, or maybe like you bit off more than you could chew at first, but these are the folks who end up growing into wonderful managers. So I do think it's wonderful at the end of the day, but funny that seems to be a through line for a lot of people.
Yeah, so, it's constant. It's constant. And don't get me wrong, I still use it. Every time that somebody comes to me, it's like, hey, Javier, I've been thinking about manager path. I actually stop. It's like, I want to hear more, right? Because maybe it's a signal that I'm doing a bad job, or it's a signal that your manager, you have something that you haven't shared with me about your manager, and I want to hear more, right? Where is that motivation coming from, right? It's not always the case, but yeah, that's a curious fact, right? Every time that somebody comes to me, it's like, I've been thinking of manager path. I really stop for a second. It's like, okay, I want to hear more. Yeah.
Good. That's great that you're kind of like your radar goes out just in case. So yeah, and then I guess again I want to ask you some more like high level questions in terms of just some of the biggest challenges that I think engineering leaders face and how we kind of navigate these. So one that I think is a really, really common issue that tons of folks face is we've got this desire to foster innovation in a team. We certainly want to always be building the latest, greatest, most fantastic product, leveraging the newest technologies. But at the same time, there's also a focus on we've got these deadlines coming up. We have to deliver X, Y, and Z. How do we balance those two things? I mean, how have you found success in your experience?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a very complex problem. I don't think anybody has a perfect solution for it, because at the end of the day, every engineer is a human, and every human is different, and every human has different motivation, right? So I don't think there is a silver bullet to tell you this is the framework how you're always going to have the right balance. But one of the things that actually have worked really well for me is that same transparency, right? Um, why are you doing something, right? There is a very different idea when you are trying to finish or execute a project. um, there are different reactions depending of if the team understand what they are doing something, right? um, is an art. Explaining actually why you are doing something is not an easy task, and this is what one of the most difficult tasks of every manager: understand and explain how they are doing something and why they are doing something, and be transparent about it, right? So I get it. We are curious by nature. We want to go with the latest and the greatest, and we want to experiment, and we want to be creative, right? But at the end of the day, we are part of companies that are businesses, and they need to grow, and they have their own goals. So you need to explain what you are doing something, right? Um, hey, we have this particular project, we have a deadline, and we need to finish by the end of the quarter. We regularly don't have deadlines for this. Okay, explain why, right? This is part of a partnership. This is part of a particular customer. These are the problems that they are having. This is why. This is why we decided to do it in that way, right? If you explained everything why, right? What the results that we're expecting to yield? What are the goals that you're trying to accomplish? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? What is the opportunity that you are trying to assess? Explain that. It's very useful, because if you take the time to explain and tell the team what is the actual problem that you are trying to solve, not only they are going to understand what you are trying to do and then agree or disagree and move on, they can actually give you better answers to the original problem, right? So when you do this balance between creativity and actual jobs to be done, right? Where do you find the intersection? I don't think those are a trade-off. I think you can actually try to um, like direct the creativity into solving the real problems, right? One of the most common cases that you face on engineering is maintenance, right? Hey, we have this team that is maintaining applications been running for 10 years. There are not much to do, but we have 3 escalations a week, and somebody needs to solve it, right? Um, yeah, that's not great. As an engineer, that's not what you want. The majority of engineers don't want to do that, right? So how do you balance out? How do you give the team something new, something creative to work on? Well, explain the problem. Explain why that thing is generating issues, even if it has been live for 10 years, right? Try to understand what is the actual problem. Software engineers are not coding machines. Software engineers, we want to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
So give software engineer problems to solve, right? The problem don't necessarily need to be a new fancy algorithm that you need to discover. The problem can be something has been there for 10 years and nobody has realized that it's there. The problem can be that is how to solve the problem, about how to solve the issue about having not having enough time. That's another problem to solve, right? You solve it with automation, you solve with another thing. I think the value is in providing transparency about what are you doing, why are you doing, what is the actual problem, and let engineers to solve those problems. That's where you are going to find the balance between the creativity and the actual skills.
So it sounds like you put quite an emphasis on autonomy for the engineers to, I mean, at the end of the day, you want to give them a problem to solve, not assign them a task, because assigning them a task can just feel like, well, hey, point at something and walk that way, and that's
Yeah.
I won't give you context other than that, as opposed to actually posing a problem that they get a chance to come up with a creative solution for, or the best solution for. Is that about right?
Yeah, that is about right, right? You need to start somewhere, right? In order to
Sure.
be able to solve problems, you need to know how to finish tasks, right?
Fair.
So
That's a
so
good.
it is a pyramid, right? The more
Mm-hmm.
tasks you learn how to solve, right, the better. But the next level is like, give me a problem, I will find the solution, I will implement the task, right? So there is always this debate about like, there are some people that just need tasks because they cannot solve problems. Everybody can solve problem, but there is enough amount of tasks that you also need to learn how to solve first,
Mm-hmm.
right? Complete the task, learn how to find problems, learn how to solve problems, and then you keep growing the pyramid.
And you have to be able to, of course, trust your engineers. So I wonder, when it comes to actually building out these teams, I mean, attracting and retaining talent in the job market right now is, of course, tremendously difficult. Do you have specifically like specific strategies that you employ to find those individuals that you can build a really reliable team with?
Yeah. I think there is always a balance, right? There are different philosophies, and depending the company and the problems that you have, you don't need to get married to one particular philosophy. You can actually use different type of strategies to hire and retain, depending exactly of the problem of the company you have, the stage of the company. Then you use one or the other, right? Um, but at the end, I think is for managers is understanding that a team is always the sum of all the elements, right? It's never about the individual; it's about the group, right? So you need to have a balanced team, especially if you're a manager. You need to give the right opportunities to everyone, because that's what is going to be the most attractive team for engineers to join the team. The opportunities, right?
Mm.
It's not always going to be the compensation. It's not always going to be the problem. It's going to be about the opportunities, right? So if you're a manager and you hire a team of 5 very senior engineers, right, the ceiling is top, right? There are no opportunities. You hire very senior engineers to solve complex problems, but there is nothing beyond that. If you hire a balanced team, right? If you hire the right amount of senior talent, mid-level talent, junior talent, you give the opportunities for the senior talent to coach and mentor the medium level talent, and then you give an opportunity the medium talent to coach and train the more junior talent. Everybody's going to have an opportunity to demonstrate their skills and their value by doing that leveling, right? So you need to have some balance. You want to have somebody in your team, depending if you're a product team, you want to have engineers that are more product oriented engineers, product engineers, right? If you are a backend or a platform or an infra group, you want engineers that have that context, but at least you want one engineer in your team that understand the customer, right? So if you have a platform team and all the engineers in your team are platform oriented engineers, but nobody has that customer experience, guess what? Even platform teams have customers, right? So you need somebody who understands that. So while there is no particular, I think, silver bullet for how to solve this problem, my recommendation is always understand what are the context, the company goals, the company necessities, and build teams that are balanced, that give everybody opportunities.
I love that. And I wonder how that's gotten more difficult as you've dealt with bigger and bigger teams. I mean, like you said, now at Carta, you're managing a team of 75 people. What kinds of challenges does scaling present that maybe you weren't prepared for, or that you've had to learn to work around?
Yeah, one of the biggest ones for me is like, I talk about transparency and communication and be direct with engineers, and I I still have one-on-one to skip levels with every single engineer in my team, right?
Oh, amazing.
As you scale, that became more and more difficult, right?
Yeah.
One thing is your desire, one thing is your philosophy and your stubbornness. Like, no, I want to talk with every engineer on my team, right? Well, guess what? Time is limited, right? So you need to not do it on a monthly basis, not do it on a bi-monthly basis, now quarterly, now probably every half year, right?
Hmm.
So this is one of the biggest challenges for me in my philosophy, in my openness, in my transparency philosophy. When do I get the opportunity to talk with every single one of them? That's one of the biggest challenges that I face, right? That you only happen to have with the skill, right? So the way that you try to solve is to actually coach your managers to follow the same philosophy,
Mm.
right? And then expect that the cascade of information always reach every corner you want it to reach.
Mm.
Um, Doing that is easy to say, it's not difficult to get. Right, it's not difficult to get. So this is one of the major challenge in my philosophy, the communication, transparency, how to get to every engineer. That's the biggest one. There are a few other ones. For example, like um, I talk about opportunities and motivation, right? It's easier when I use example of 6 people, right? When you have bigger group, right? How do you make sure that we are providing the right opportunities to all of them, right? How do we make sure that we provide also the message that there are no more opportunities, right? That's another big challenge, right? If you cannot do it person by person and then you need to deliver a group messages, right? It's very difficult to provide very specific information like that. Like, hey, at that certain point, there are no more opportunities.
Hmm.
Right? How do you communicate that to a larger group? Those are some of the challenges that came with skill. Right? All of that, what you balance now, the responsibility of understanding the strategy of the company, working with all areas except engineering now.
Gotcha. Yeah. So and I wonder too, uh, enlighten me that at Carta, your current team, are you guys in office or is it fully distributed or half and half? What does that look like?
In terms of location, we're fully distributed. In my group of those 73, we have people located in Kitchener, Waterloo in Canada, New York, Seattle, San Francisco, Santa Clara, and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. So that's the distribution. All the people that are co-located within the short distance of an office, they go to office 3 days a week, right? But we also have some amount of population that is fully remote.
Gotcha. Uh, is this, I mean, obviously in this kind of like post-COVID world, remote work is more and more common. Is this something that you had experience with even in the 2010s, or is this a little newer for you?
So I have all type of different teams. Before during pandemic, I was in a company and we moved all our teams fully remote. Until this day, that company is still exercising fully remote, right? Um, so much scale of that in the past. Back in Mexico, I have offshore teams in different countries as well, right? That work fully remote. So it's not new, right?
Okay.
What is new is this combination of like a hybrid method, right?
Right.
Hybrid is the new thing for me. Yeah.
Do you find, I mean, do you lean one way or the other in terms of I think this model works best, or I think I see clear advantages for doing hybrid versus remote, or what are the trade-offs there in your experience?
There are plenty of trade-offs. And I'm going to give you my point of view, my personal point of view,
Please.
right? So I live here in the Bay Area. I live in San Ramon, East Bay, in San Francisco. I take part to go those 3 times a week to the office, and every time that I'm on board on my way to downtown San Francisco, I I actually contemplate my life and my life decisions for me to be in that position. I do not like my commute, right?
Gotcha.
I There is at that moment there is nothing that I hate more than me being in that place at that time, right? Now I get into the office and the world is completely different, right?
Hmm.
I actually enjoy being with my team. I actually enjoy the possibility to quickly nudge somebody, jump into a conference room and discuss a particular topic and solve it, right? I do
Hmm.
enjoy the opportunity to talk and mingle with other areas of the company and every day learn something different, right? I do like that. I enjoy that, right? Do I think like be on site is the only way to get that? No. That's definitely something that you can get also in a remote setup, but I do need to acknowledge that it's a little more difficult, right? Now, it depends on the necessity of the companies, right? Carta, we are a particular business that we need to learn a lot of things. There is no CPA career that you don't learn equity on school, right? So this is a company where you have the opportunity to every day learn something different if you are next to the right person, right?
Hmm.
But there are other areas in the industry, in the software engineering industry, that you don't need that, right? So I think it's company by company. They may have different necessities, and they may have different way to accomplish those necessities. We definitely value that closeness and that opportunities that are unlocked by being next to the right person. Is that something that happened to everyone? Maybe not, right? Because I say you only gain if you are sitting next to the right person. But that's the way that I see it, right? That's the way that I see it. Take from whatever system the company is implementing the best out of that, right? And if you think that there are no benefits at all, then there are plenty of other things. Right?
Gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess along with that question of remote work, again, with it being more prevalent now, it's very easy for everybody to be online all the time, and for, the the line between when I've started working and when I've stopped working to get very blurry. It's obviously a very hot button issue right now in the tech world. I mean, how do you think about work life balance, and what measures do you take to ensure that you've got a balance not only for yourself, but that you kind of cultivate something healthy within your own team?
Yeah, this is a very specific questions that I've been working during the last year with a lot of my skip levels. Right, this is a constant question that came up. Right, um, not only because of the distribution of work life balance, but also within like the different like situations where the company is. Right, um, good, bad, good press, bad press, all these different things, right? So very often this question came up, like, Javier, how do I balance everything that is happening,
Hmm.
right? And my answer, I don't have a one single answer. My answer is you need to adapt. You need to figure it out yourself, right? You need to understand what are your values, and then you need to understand what are your boundaries. Be very specific as a person to set up your boundaries and then your values, and then go from there. And as an example, I tell them I have very specific values, right? I have a family, I have a house, and my number one motivation to actually wake up every day and go to work is my family, right? So everything that I'm doing is for my family. But everybody has their own motivation. Figure it out what is your motivation and then set your boundaries. My boundaries is the day that I constantly need to work during the weekends, that's crossing my boundary, right? So I will not allow that, and that
Mm.
will be my personal boundary. And this is where I draw the line, and where my values are not aligned with my company, right? But those are personal. Everybody has
Yeah.
different ones, right? There are a lot of people that are very young, that are very motivated, and they want to do like accelerate growth, right? And they want to climb the ladder faster than anybody else, and say, Javier, I love working and I want to work 12 hours a day, and I feel bad because everybody's shaming me about it, right? It's like, set up your boundaries. What do you want to do? And it doesn't matter what everybody else do or think, right?
Hmm.
Set your own personal boundaries, set your values, and as long everything that is around you is within your values, then continue. And if at some point somebody, company, manager, peer, families asking you to get out of that, that's when you draw the line and say, well, maybe it's time to do something different, right?
So you would be an advocate of this is very much something that each individual is responsible for setting for themselves. It's not part of company culture to make this decision. It's part of the onus is on the individual.
Yeah, I think the helpful part of the company culture is that it sets the boundaries for the company, right?
Mm.
The company culture and the policies and all these different indicators are going to tell you where are the values and the boundaries of a particular company, right? Uh, so that's how it's helpful, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a manager, you will be very happy to know where are the boundaries of all your direct reports, so you have a better way to work with them and understand their growth and coach them and help them, and also help them to be very efficient, right? But you as an employee, you also need to value if you get very good clarity about what are the company boundaries, and that's actually what is defined by the company culture and the company policies.
Understood. Yeah, I think that's a great distinction. Just some a little more casual stuff that I'd love to hear about. Like so to start with, right now, anything super interesting that's got your attention that you're reading or listening to or watching at the moment?
My manager, Will Larson, just published a book called Engineering Executive Primer. It's a full guide on you get to that job, to the executive engineering work for the first time. This is the guideline. So I've been
Wow.
revisiting that in the last weeks. Yeah.
I love that and how relevant to this podcast too. I'm gonna have to check that out. Absolutely. Okay, Javier, how does Javier diffuse stress when you're feeling a little too pent up?
I have a list of hobbies, and all of them are in a dormant state, right? So that's what I like to do, right?
Is
I don't
photography
have
still on that
one.
list?
It is on a list. I have a few like lenses there, right? But I have a list of them, right? I can spend hours talking about like audio equipment. I can spend hours talking about home theater equipment. I also have like periods of buying Pokemon cards, watch soccer, take my kids to soccer, different soccer games. Like I have a list of what works for me is that I don't have one hobby. I
Mm.
have multiple of them, and depending what is the feeling at the moment, I take one of them.
You can kind
Yeah,
of pull from different
yeah.
buckets. I love that. How about like a quote or a mantra that you tend to live by, or maybe something more recently that's just resonating with you at the moment?
More recent and based on the topics that we were discussing, people were joking about it that I use a term very often that is company agnostic, right?
Company agnostic.
Yeah, so every time like we discuss it, when you set your boundaries, when you set this set of values that you are going to live for, no matter what are the company values of the company cultures, always do it on a company agnostic approach, right? Think first about yourself, right? What is good for you, and then go from there. If you're thinking about growth, don't look at growth at the opportunities you have at the company, just look at from a company agnostic perspective what is looking for you. It's not my mantra, but apparently I repeat that a lot, and now people make fun like you are the company agnostic guy. So there you go.
It's kind of it followed you. It chased you
Yeah.
down. Well, that's awesome. That's actually all I've got for you, Javier. I really appreciate your time and your insights. I think it's been a fantastic conversation, and I would love to kind of continue chatting if you're up for it. Maybe down the road we can do a second episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's been great.
Well,